ora talofa malo lele and welcome to today's Talanoa panel session where we talk about all things sport migration, which is meaning people travelling around the world to play sport. We have Pita Alatini, Tonica Cassie-Alatini, Census Johnston and Lisa Uperesa. Let's get started then. We're going to throw to you first, Lisa. Can you explain maybe just a little bit for everyone, break it down of what sport migration is and probably the idea of transnational identities?
Yeah, I mean, if we think about migration, it's just a scholarly, a policy word of capturing how people move, right? And usually you think there's lots of different flows. People might move from one place to another, stay forever. They might keep moving, they might move back to their home. Those are all different flows of migration. And so when we're thinking about sport migration, it's how people are moving, connected to the sport pathways and opportunities. So when you're talking about people moving across national boundaries, not just in sport, even in our own communities, the idea of transnational connection is we're keeping connected across these different national boundaries. And once you live in different places, that impacts your life experience, it impacts your identity, how you think about yourself, how you're connected to your communities. And so transnational identities can be felt in lots of different ways and they look very different across the world.
With rugby, moving over to Japan and in your case France, can you remember what it was like that first initial kind of year or a bit when you went over?
Yeah, I think the excitement, I suppose, of something new was really the reason. We were a young family of 4 at the time. Rugby, I think I was in and out in professional rugby. Coming to the end of my years, I probably just looking for something new. And honestly, it was probably a 2-year contract that we're going through. That's all I thought. Nice to go 2 years and then come back.
That's what you told us.
That's what I told the kids. Plan, Peter. Good. But I think as we're talking and I reflect, I think it was just my decision ultimately as probably head of family, but also as a rugby player, was like next opportunity, we got to go without probably too much thought, if I was honest, around how our family would fit in or fit into this migration or move. But I think with Megan and Tonica and then our baby Tiara, just knowing who they are and how they, I suppose, can manoeuvre in the space, I think I took that as for granted that they'll be fine, you know?
They'll be right.
Hey, no worries,
Japan sounds great. No.
Yeah, so it was like, so it was really the opportunity to start afresh, I suppose, for rugby was the real main goal, and also probably income, again, that's going to suffice the family and kind of new opportunities. But yeah, that was in terms of that first year. As we found out, there's so much to do. You know, our Japanese people love to do paperwork, so there was phenomenal amount of paperwork just to get bank accounts or, you know, your license transferred over.
Alien
cards, lines. So there was a whole lot of process that I didn't even think about that we had to all go through before even getting on the rugby field. So it was probably a bit of hard waking, but did I wake up? No. Rugby was still my focus and just to get there in place. So that initial part, definitely on reflection, it wasn't really the family, of course, going over together, but really it was the rugby challenge, just to go over there, play something new, earn some money again and start afresh.
Totally. Do you remember what it was like actually for your own experience in that period?
I feel like I remember it like it was yesterday. And moving alone wasn't new for us because we'd moved around New Zealand quite a bit anyway. But yeah, when they first told me we were going to Japan, I had no idea what to expect because it wasn't like the era of internet like it was now. I couldn't just go onto TikTok and search like things to do in Japan. So at the time, it was Bieber. Yeah, it was definitely so different. And to be honest, at the time, I just thought that we would be going to an Asian country that was like, you know, my idea of it was like back in the day. So I thought I'd be wearing, you know, like the rice hat and I'd be out there like, you know. And then we get there and there's all these buildings and it was huge. So when we got there, it was such an incredible experience. And we had a great experience because Dad was playing for a massive club and we got the special treatment. So that move was easy. It was fine. it was when he moved me up north later on that really took my experience in a different, in a different trajectory, because we went from Tokyo, which is super westernized, everyone speaks English, it's really easy to get around, to later moving to the northeast coast, which was rural Japan. It was probably more so what I thought we were going to initially.
You saw the right
that's when I was like, I'm here. Yeah.
Serving your dreams.
Yeah, I was like, oh, this is Japan. Yeah. So once we started to move out there, I was exposed to the culture, and I didn't have friends that spoke English. I was probably the first brown person that they'd met in person, ever. So that road of our travels definitely took our lives in a different journey. But I had learnt so much from it, and I wouldn't change it for anything.
Did you have the same kind of experiences then with your own families going over to France?
Initially, when we first left, it was just me and my wife. So we were married at the time, but in 2005, we went thinking we were only going to be there for 6 months as injury cover. And then things changed, and then just got offered a few contracts after that. And then we just decided we loved it, and then we stayed. Our oldest was born in London. And then our other two were born in Toulouse in France. Yeah. And then we've adapted real well over the last couple of years, and they totally love their New Zealand lives, but also miss a bit of their French lives as well, and that's where they are.
Tonica touched on it, like how do you know who your support people are then? Because if you're going over and you don't have your normal, who is like your family, I'm going to assume.
A lot of our people were outside of footy, and I think that was real important for us though too. But those relationships are built over time, and we still keep in touch with those people as well. And they're pretty much our family, but also people who we can turn to. Like if we needed to get out of the country, then be like, oh, can you take the girls? And that is something that needs to be trusted to a certain point. Yeah. Where you can just like, okay, relax, because then you'll be on a plane and then you'll be like, oh man, other girls, it's going to be all right.
Lisa, you probably had something similar with your own upbringing. Travelling over to Canada to play, to live there for your dad's gridiron career. Can you talk on a little bit of how your experiences were?
My dad had started with the Philadelphia Eagles before he went to Canadian Football League. But I was 3 when we moved back to Samoa. So that part, I really recognize, even when we moved back, because my dad was a coach on island for ages. And even that, he was gone for the team stuff, he was gone for the games, he was gone the night before. And my mom was, handling everything on the home front. And I always said, I would never want to marry a coach or a player.
Yep.
Because of that.
Absolutely.
It's incredible. I mean, but it could have happened. Luckily, it didn't. My husband's not a player or coach. But I think that's one of the things that, we don't see as much is all that it takes to keep the home life really solid when the partner's out playing.
I think that's an important thing, because a lot of people from the outside see it as a real good, cool life, and you see just the good things, but behind the scenes, there's so many dynamics that go on. It's not smooth sailing.
I think I was very lucky because we had a lot of open communication. So, even though, yes, every time we moved, we knew why we were moving, but it was like a conversation. Like we were talking about how do we feel, we would always talk through things. And even though ultimately this decision was, whatever would be best for Dad's career, because that also affected us as well, we did talk about it, multiple times about, okay, is South Africa an option, or is England an option, or the States? So we were always having these conversations. So it gave me space to also tell them, oh God, I'm not really fitting in. And because, to give you context, when we first moved to Japan, I was going to an American school, it's an international school, so all of the expats that have, these crazy jobs like CEO of MasterCard or, the president of Disneyland, and they're like, what does your dad do? I'm like, he's a rugby player. And they're like, what's rugby? I'm like football kind of thing. So it was easier for me to adapt there because everybody was from somewhere else. But then when we moved up to the northeast coast, it was a full Japanese school. There were no English speaking schools in a 3-hour radius. And so I would sit there with my translator. She would sit beside me and she would translate everything that was happening in the classroom. So they'd talk through the class, and then she'd go, okay, so now they're talking about, science stuff. And then I would ask her, and so that was the process of me learning.
Whoa.
So it was very different. And then I think because she was an adult, the kids didn't really want to talk to me because they thought that she was like a snitch or something, or like she's a teacher. So no one would talk to me. And so I just told them, that was kind of the first thing that I tell them is, okay, I don't have friends because I've got this translator. Just let me be in the classroom and I'll pick it up. Like, we'll find a way. I'll do classes later.
And you had those translators there.
Yeah, so I only lasted 1 month with the translator. I was like, can you guys go, please? And so then, she left me after a month. And then within maybe 5 months, I was speaking fluent Japanese. So that was like, okay, cool. Now I'm getting to know the people. I'm starting to feel a little bit more Japanese. It's like that constant battle, because I'm Tongan South African. That's already, 2 different cultures, and now I'm here trying to be Japanese. It's like, okay, I've dealt with that one.
Who am I? Like, all of it.
Am I in all of this? So I started to slowly, find who I was, but I was more like finding myself through them. Like, I wasn't really finding myself. I was just trying to make it easier on myself so that I could have friends. And so as much as I loved my friends, I loved living in Kamaishi, I just knew that they weren't really going to understand me. Like, it just wasn't going to happen. So that's how the conversation came up, and I was like, okay guys, I think I've done my best here. I've really tried. I want to have the option to go to university, so what do we think about me moving to New Zealand? And my mum was like, no, you can't leave me. And I was like, Dad, help me out here, please.
What about you, Census? Your kids now, obviously you had them overseas. They're back here and they're in a French unit, I understand?
Yeah.
How does that dynamic work?
There have been some funny instances where my girls have come home and being in the French bilingual unit, there's also the Samoan unit as well. So kids from the Samoan unit be like, hey, what are you doing there? And they're like, oh, I'm French. And they're like, no, you're not. So then my daughters will be coming home and telling me these stories. I'm like, yeah, you tell them you're Samoan and you're French too, because you are.
Yeah.
That's what you are. And so their transition into New Zealand life is funny, but it also has its low points as well. But
You underestimate how hard it is coming back. You always think that the hardest part is going to the new country, but what I actually found harder was coming back, and then coming back into society with an expectation that you're like everyone else, but you're not, and you've missed out on so much with friends and family and milestones. It can get quite hard to make that connection again, and that's why I find so many people do move here, back home, and then they go again, because then it's they come here and they're like, actually maybe this isn't right for us. You crave what it was before.
That's a huge thing. I always remember reminding Tiara and Trey around when we come back home. I think we did it more with those two when we came back, understanding probably the experience of what Tonica had gone through and how to fit back in. Because both of them came back and they had to go to ESOL.
They couldn't speak. The English was their second language.
Japanese was so fluent.
Yeah.
They couldn't read the
That's
English books.
amazing though.
Yeah.
Two languages, come on.
So they had to go back, and also their writing, and with Japanese, they have to writing down.
Yeah.
And then now they're coming back to horizontal, so their writing will start across and then start going down. The teacher will call us in and goes, you see, look, they're brought up from Japan and this is the way it is. But then we're probably a bit more aware as parents to talk to the kids and saying, look, this is just natural part of your growth. This is where you're at with just coming back. And I think they were still young enough.
And they had each other.
And they had each other.
They
So they were
2
able
years
to
apart, so it was
support each
very,
other, which was huge, and still do now. They managed to transition, I felt, much easier compared to Tenex, and being able to see that, just because obviously the age when they came back, plus they were together, plus us as parents being more aware to talk that through.
Yes.
And I think that's a big key point around, just because of, we didn't live overseas, we came here, but with our parents, the only chat was either being told what to do, or and you wouldn't have a conversation with your parents. As such, it was and that was fine, but in our sense, and that was probably a big part from Megan's part as a mother, was around, you have to conversate with your kids, just like, hey,
What is that?
don't talk to them, don't talk back. Option. Kids don't get an option. But that was my learning. Hey.
Mum said we've got options.
So they'll use that. So they use that and say,
Mum
you
said
have
we
to
have a
talk this
choice.
out. It was like, oh, mate.
But you've had an upbringing we've had discussions before. It's like very fast upbringing, right? And now you're talking about parenting girls first, but also potentially different to how you were raised. How does that work around your own parenting style?
I try to really run off my wife quite a bit, because she's the one who's been taught a different way, and I think that's important to my growth as well, because man, shucks, we used to be told, hey, be quiet, can do the jobs and that sort of thing, and that's all I know, you know.
Right.
But I'm really trying to unlearn that sort of thing and just give them the opportunity. But man, it's so tough.
We have a similar thing in my house, but it's me who's like having to bite my tongue, and like I think that, you know, I have to kind of pull back, because even though I wasn't raised, you know, like full Fasamo, because, you know, our family being mixed, but also my dad having different kinds of experiences overseas, he would just kind of like, you know, calm things down with my grandmother when, you know, she was getting to, you know, hard line. But even you take those experiences with you, you know, into parenting and as a parent, and I just, okay. And so my husband's like, all right, hold on, calm down, you know, let's go. Let's have this conversation. And, you know, when you're overseas now, like we are, you know, we've been here for 7 years now, you have all of these issues, you know, coming up with the kids. And like traditionally, we don't have the space to have that kind of talk. We don't talk about these things, but it's been better when we're able to. Still working on it, still working on it.
Well, from like the child's perspective, like open communication is like massive, but because like the game of rugby affects so much more than the athlete, it affects the family that moves. And when I look at like my brother, who's the son of an All Black, like that for me is like a daunting thought within itself. Like I'm like, oh, thank goodness I'm a woman, so I don't have, no one asks me if I want to be an All Black, but you know, they ask. No one asks me if I want to be even then, you know, like no one's asking me. I'm like, but with my brother, it's like, you know, it's been a constant in his life. Is like, oh, you play rugby. Oh, are you going to follow your dad's footsteps? And you know, you have this like expectation that because that was their line of work, that you know that they're going to follow as well, and so there's that pressure for them, and for us it's like having that lens of understanding we can do anything, and going back to that vehicle, maybe it doesn't look the same, like maybe it's not a rugby future, maybe that's, you know, not putting that pressure on them to be like that's what you have to do, but still being open enough to want to explore those options overseas and how that looks.
Lisa, you touch on that, probably comes back to like in the academic sense, the sport migration and the history of how sports and codes have shaped different pathways.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, what you're saying, first of all, the expectations start early. And when we have, you know, these games so ingrained in our community and in our families, even as the other options start to open up. So, you know, early on it was like laboring, you know, maybe in farming, going into security work, but sport being, you know, really big on this side, sport being big on the other side as well. The like thinking about the American Samoa pathways, but the military is also really big there, right? And so early on, sport being this kind of golden ticket. I think even now we think about it that way, but we have people going into the arts, you know, into technology. I think what you see, especially with the earlier generation, one of the things that they're able to give their kids is options, and that, you know, that kind of opportunity that they didn't necessarily have. I mean, none of my siblings have gone to the pros. My brothers played football in college, but everybody's gone a different career path. And so I think you start to see that now because of the success of the earlier generations.
You've written a book essentially on the pipeline from American Samoa into the US for NFL. But not all of us, that's only like 1% of people. So what do you think should actually happen at that development level to actually realise not all our babies are going to reach a sporting success.
Yeah, I mean, on that side, one of the big things is that the athletic pathway is often really tied to sports scholarships for university. And so, you know, how do we make it possible for our young people to access university without having to do sport, right? Because absolutely, I think it's less than 2% of high school players who play football make it to the NFL. Like, but one of the things that you see, especially because of the sports scholarship opportunity, and I've heard this, you know, from especially like young women in high school, is all the resources go to the boys to make sure that they're eligible so that they can access the pathway. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we can bring more resources, you know, what are the different pathways that we can try to continue to grow?
How do we make sure we show the kids a true reality pathway rather than the pathway that they think or has been told, whether it be an agent, whether it be a family member, whether it be someone, you know, a coach that's really pushing their own interests around the actual player's interests. And kind of, and with Trey, at such a young age, we spoke about the pressure that he was going to get as a son of a former All Black, and I got it as a son of a former Ikaletahi, you know, legend back in Tonga. My dad, and Dad's dream and his outcome was at least one of the four of us would be an All Black. That's one of his big reasons for coming across to New Zealand, besides work and better opportunities. But his ultimate goal was that out of the four, one will become an All Black, and that pressure, like, you know, there's three above me, and then they also stepped it, and then number four. What do you mean? It's like, you know, three were more talented, and this is a common narrative between all our families, Pasifika families, where their parents have got a goal, and it's their goal. It's not necessarily our goal, and so we have to live that goal for them, right? But I do reflect and understand that, man, that was a lot to take on. And being number four, knowing our hierarchical system within Tongan culture, that your eldest is still the, you know, he's got all the decisions, that things fall on him, and you just know your place, you know. But when you're number four and you get elevated because of your status to kind of to have that role when you're not really ready, I think that was a lot of things that I just used to pass out, but probably kind of subconsciously made sure that, man, I can't do that to my kids when I get to that, you know, to really live a dream of that. Probably the only one thing I did have was to give my kids an experience of my experience at a private school, because I had such a good experience. So how could I create something like that, and whether they do sport or not was totally up to them. What I started to get was I was defined by rugby, and we'll get that all the time, sense that everyone just wants to know because you're an All Black or Manu Samoa, but what they don't know that, and what you probably believe in that because you're so ingrained in it, but as you get older, you're going to go, well, actually, I've got all these skills that I got here. How do I make it worthwhile in this life that defines who I actually am and shows my passion and love and this other thing that I know I can do. And that's probably where I really instilled with Trey and Tara and Tanik's, like, man, we got a real head start just being an All Black, and Megan being a TV presenter and personality, but how can we do that now to shape the skills of what the kids want and what they want to do, and then really kind of be on the background and support them, however that looks. For Trey, it wasn't about a mentor anymore, just wants his dad. Hey, and that's probably a big part where, as a former, international professional rugby player, how do we make sure that we're just a dad when the kids need you to be the dad, Even if you the social dad and whatever. No, we don't want the social dad. We just want the dad.
The supportive coach dad.
We just want dad.
What's your dad doing in
not
a
that
pub?
side, dad. You want me to come too? Oh man! No, not that dad.
Did you ever? Is there a flip side to what Ala's talking about then, Census, in terms of expectations of you may not have followed the actual athlete development pathway for rugby? Like to get to Manu Samoa, it was a different experience. And then you went overseas. Was it a financial decision that actually, I'm going to go over there because the contracts are a little bit better?
I think initially when I did decide to leave New Zealand, it was just because there were blocks there. I was stuck behind a couple of players at the time, and I got told, look, you're not going to play international. You'll probably be a good club player. So then got asked to play for Samoa, trialled, got into the team, went to England, played against England, and then got asked to cover for 6 months back in 2005. So then when I went, I was like, shucks, man, I want to come back and play Super 12 at the time. And then when I got there, shucks, we were playing in front of like 80,000 people. I was to playing in front of 5'10" in New Zealand. So then, like, yes. So when I got to Europe, like I got offered a few contracts and options that I didn't think were available at that time. And then just decided to stay. But not knowing we were going to be there for like almost 20 years. So yeah, it was a good career. But I think also at the time was that it's so important to remember to separate yourself from the rugby player, also to being a normal person. And I think just having people away from the game, you know, gives you that sort of normality.
You both have then essentially gone back into the game to support the others coming through. You know, like you've gone back into your athlete development pathway essentially at the NPC level. You've done it with your own trust, with your family. Are you guys seeing the same sort of things when you were coming through a pathway, or is it different?
With our Pita Alatini trust, named after Dad, part of our main why around that was working on the true reality pathway, you know, understanding how important education is. And we know that some of our kids are just so fixated on this that they just totally forget the sport, totally miss education. And we common narrative is around us just saying, look, the importance of education, again, yes, it's important to get, if you want to succeed around diplomas or higher education, but for me it was just around, if you want to be a top professional rugby player, you're going to have to learn how to write, to read, to communicate, which all these skills you cannot get unless you're at school and you can't, be part of the education system to get you there. So there's a push around that and push around mentoring kids, really constantly talking to them, keeping them in realistic, avenues, so that kind of it really balances out their life rather than it's too far one way. Then the other side, with what we do in terms of, I suppose for me after coaching and when I kind of got time to step out of the game to be able to see this more in clarity as the other side is having more our Pasifika or Māori representation in key roles, whether it be coaching as a front line for me, then it's in roles around back office, whether we have GMs or Pasifika, just to understand our people there, because the majority percentage of players are Pasifika Māori that are coming through, and it's getting dictated across even workforce, around New Zealand. So we need more representation to hear our voice and how our people work and how we roll in those key areas. And I suppose where I'm trying to dabble now is around governance. How do I understand a bit more of that to really push? I've seen what the front line does, and there's so many of us in there, which is great. But unless we get change up the top around some of key decisions in key areas, then we're just going to keep going in a cycle where we just end around here rather than probably getting to the top of our games.
That follows on from life after rugby as well. Like when you stop, like that was a big thing for us when we moved back, was like, okay, so what do I do now? And Dad was like applying for jobs and stuff. I was like, so what are you going to do now, And then it did funnel back into rugby, but for a while you were looking at other avenues, and Dad actually did some banking when he was younger as well. So he was like, do I go back into banking? Or it's like you start to look outside of the role, roles that aren't rugby, and you having that education piece and having those extra roles that are more accessible for our people gives people options for life after rugby, because we're seeing a lot of our men, leave the sport and then fall into these traps of depression and, mental health issues because rugby was everything. But we need there to be more options for our ladies, for our men, for our athletes, so that there is life after sport, because, that's one avenue, but when you're finished with that, however long that is, what do you have after that?
Because
So-
it will end
Yeah.
eventually.
It
I mean, you
ends.
will always have a second career after being a player. It's just a question of, what that's going
What
to
it
be.
is, yeah.
But even kind of keeping that, like you guys were talking about, the athletic identity, keeping that as like part and not the whole thing.
Yeah.
So many things can happen in that kind of, pursuit of the sport pathway. What are you going to do when you're off of it? And how do we make it easier for people to transition successfully?
That's right.
Yeah.
Appreciate you guys for taking out the time to come today, and hopefully we do part 2 sometime, because I feel like there definitely is a lot more to unpack. So yeah, thank you for coming to join us at our Talanoa
Thank you for bringing us together.
Yeah, I loved it.
Fantastic.